Hello, vinyl community. We are back. I had meant to get this video out a little while back, but it took me some time to get everything together. And I also got really busy with work this last week. But this video is going to be about 18 or so common albums. Most of them are very common. Some are my absolute favorite from the band or the artist as well, but they're easy to find. But the versions I'm going to show you either have errors, mispressings, or different labels that may make them extremely valuable. So this is kind of a collector's secret, as it were, right? So the people that have been digging forever are always looking for these. And now I want to share them with you so you can dig for them as well when you're out and check the same way I do. And hopefully you can land on a few and pay the small price for it, but get the big value on it since it'll be worth more and a collector's piece for you. So without further ado, the very first album, The Doors, Soft Parade. This is a good one. It's really underrated, I think, in the catalog as well. Um, I really like this album. A lot of people kind of poo-poo it because Robbie Krieger did a lot of the writing on it, and Jim Morrison was a little bit more absent, I guess, as far as the writing goes. But this is the version that most people have here. It's the red Elektra label. And if you get that version, it's great. It sounds fantastic. And it's probably worth somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15, maybe $20 if it's a really nice, clean copy with no ringware. But the one that I want you to keep your eye out for is the Allentown PA pressing. And I'll show you that. Because this one is worth quite a bit more. In nice shape, like this guy here. This one's in the shrink with the hype sticker, which is nice, but this is the real part that makes it valuable. Is it's on the gold label Elektra, which was the label prior to the red label. This album came out in 1969, so this was the very last album to have this gold label on it. So if you find this Allentown PA, I think there's another pressing that has the gold label as well besides Allentown, but it's going to be worth considerably more than the red label. And it's kind of cool since it's the last one that Elektra ever pressed on the gold. So I would definitely keep your eye out for that one. It sounds fantastic too, and it's definitely a fun one to have. So the next one I have for you is another super common one. It's the Monkees, right? The Monkees' first self-titled album came out in 1966 on Cold Gems. So this is an extremely common album, and you can pick this up most times for $5 or under. But if you get a very first pressing, I'll show you the differences. So the later pressings will have an RE right over in this area right here. And then they also have the corrected Mike Nesmith track, Papa Jean's Blues. Right here you can see it's misspelled. Jean is with a J instead of a G. And so that carries on throughout the rest of it. On the back here as well, you have the J instead of the G. And then even on the label, you'll have that. So that's how you know you have a very first pressing of the Monkees' first self-titled album. And that will be true for the mono and the stereo mixes. We'll have Papa Jean's spelled wrong there 3 times. Once on the label, the front of the cover, and the back of the cover. And this one is, I mean, they pressed so many of this album, so this one is, I'd say, one of the easier ones to find in the hunt for the original, in the hunt for the error. The next one I have is the Eagles' first self-titled album from 1972, which actually is getting quite a bit harder to find. I guess the first pressings are getting harder to find, it seems like. At least that's been my experience. I see less and less of them out. But the original one that you're going to find is just your sleeve with the front and back cover. And we've got a lovely Monarch pressing here. It's going to have the white label, not the clouds throughout. If the whole label has the clouds on it, like the center circle there, or the middle circle, then you have a later press. But there was a pressing that the Eagles originally wanted that David Geffen, who was the owner of Asylum Records, was not a fan of. And that one is the sawed out after one. And it's pretty easy to tell if you've got it, because instead of the traditional sleeve, you have a gatefold, right? A really cool gatefold that was put together upside down. It was actually made to be loose so that you could unfold this and you would have a large poster. And this is the band Joshua Tree, and they're all extremely high on peyote. So this one is really fun. This one's quite a bit harder to find, but again, really simple. If it's got a gatefold as opposed to the traditional sleeve, then you know you're going to have the very first iteration, the very first pressing of the first Eagles album. So, which is a fantastic album, by the way, too. Number 4. Here's one that's common, right? We see this all the time. The Rolling Stones Hot Rocks compilation 64 to 71 came out in 1971. And these are a dime a dozen, right? There's tons and tons and tons of them. And but there is this Shelley press that has different tracks or different versions of Brown Sugar and Wild Horses, which are songs 3 and 4 on side 4. And the way you can tell if you have that is there'll be an SH right over here for Shelley. And then you're going to want to go ahead and you're going to want to look on the dead wax as well. And the dead wax will have Shelley etched in it. And it will also say 11/18/71 will be the date. And that's how you know that you have these separate mixes. And these separate mixes were intended for the documentary Gimme Shelter. They weren't intended for this Hot Rocks compilation here. So if you have that, if you find that, which I always check whenever I see a Hot Rocks, I'll always check. Instead of it being a $10 or $15 album, now you're looking at more like a $100 album. So it's definitely worth it to check. And if you don't have the album and you're not that familiar with the Rolling Stones, which most people are, this is a great way to start. It's got just smattered with great singles from the Rolling Stones. All right. Next on, we're going to Mr. Todd Rundgren, Runt, which is his first album from 1970. This originally had 6 tracks on side A and 4 tracks on side B. And this one here I'll show you is my promo copy. I'm a big fan of Todd Rundgren, and I really like this album. We've Got to Get You a Woman alone is just absolutely priceless, and so much so, and it was so popular back in the day that they had to repress this album lickety split because We Got to Get You a Woman was selling out, and so they were selling a lot of the album because of that. So Ampex went to quickly try to repress the album, and in that process they sent an old master tape to be repressed. Instead of the 10 song, it's a 12 track album which is pretty rare. And I will show you. So it'll be the traditional blue label, but the easiest way to figure it out is you just have to count the tracks on the album, because side one will have 7 tracks instead of 6. And the label will still say 6 tracks on it, but you've got to count all those rings there and make sure that there's 7 instead of 6. And then side 2, same thing. Side 2 originally has 4 tracks and ends with Birthday Carol. Well, you have to count all the rings and you'll find out that it has 5 instead of 4. And I'll tell you what the differences are. So side 1, track 6 has Hope I'm Around, which wasn't supposed to be part of this album. It was actually going to be featured on his next album from 1971, which is Runt, the ballad of Todd Rundgren. And it's featured here, Hope I'm Around, as track 4 on side B. And the other one he has is on side 2, track 4, Say No More. And that song that's, I think, as far as I know, that's the only place you can find it, is on this pressing here. And then also there are some alternate mixes as well. And then besides that, there is also not only that mispressing, which is valuable, but there's one other one that has the original tracks on side 1, and on side 2 has the mispressing with the extra track. So that's what this copy is. So in that case, you're going to have your 6 tracks as normal on side A, and then you're going to have your 5 tracks on side B. And this is, they call a hybrid press. So this is definitely a little deep in the weeds, a little bit nerdy, but if you see that it's an original Ampex, I always check it out to make sure that it's not one of those, because they are quite a bit more valuable. The mispressing, I mean, again, another $10, $15 album. Normally, if you get the mispressing with the 2 extra tracks, you're looking at probably closer to $100 album in nice shape. So it's definitely worth checking out, especially when you're hunting and digging. So the next one I have for you is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's Fleetwood Mac, Then Play On. I think this is my favorite album that Fleetwood Mac ever did, and I think it's Peter Green's absolute finest work. And this here is the original U.S. pressing on the two-tone label, and these are relatively easy to find. There's nothing crazy about that. So I'll just show you what that looks like. So the very first pressings have the two-tone label on there, and the last track is Underway on side 1. And then what happened is they released a single called Oh Well, which was wildly successful, and it's a really great song. And instead of selling just singles, they wanted to bolster the sales of this album more, so they repressed the album and they put Oh Well on there. And so your repress is going to look like this, and it's going to have Oh Well on there instead of Underway. This one actually has Underway as number 4, but as number 5 is Oh Well. And so there was some track reordering when they did that. And they also omitted when they, Oh Well's a longer song, so they had to omit When You Say in My Dream by adding Oh Well. And so those are the 2 common versions that you'll find, is the original pressing, the repress. Now the one that is the trickiest to find, and that is worth the most, again, you're looking probably at around $100 if you can find one, is the very, very first repress on Terhout. So now you have the two-tone label and you have Oh Well. And this one is pretty tricky to find, but I always check the two-tone labels because if this is the one, then you've hit pay dirt. It's the one. So, and I have 3 copies just because I like the album so well. But the only version I don't have is an original UK copy. That's kind of next on my list. But phenomenal album if you haven't heard it before. But like I said, if you see a two-tone, check it out. If Oh Well is on there, then you've got Terhout first repress, and it's fantastic, and it's also worth some money. Okay, number 7, we've got Mr. Eric Clapton. This is his first studio solo album from 1970. A lot of help from a lot of different players here. And this is my Presswell copy here. This is what the label looks like. And Tom Dowd is the one who mixed this album originally. And it's a really fantastic Clapton album. I'm sure most people are familiar with it. But there is a Columbia Terhout pressing that I'm going to show you next that is rare. So I always look for the CTH on the label when I'm going through and try to see if I can find the rare pressing. And the rare pressing is a different mix. It's Eric Clapton's mix instead of Tom Dowd's mix. So again, same cover, same everything. And even your label is going to look very, very similar, right? But if it has CTH on the bottom, on the matrix right there, if you see CTH, then look at the matrix. Because if the matrix is stamped instead of etched, and it says 1A, and has the T etchings on it, then you have, and I'll see it, you probably can't quite see the etching. I'll see if I can get it up there for you. But if that's the copy you have or that you find, then you have Eric Clapton's mix. And then that elevates that from about a $10 record to about a $100 record because the mix is different throughout. These ones are definitely tricky to find. I've found 2 out in the wild, so they can be had. But I always check. Even though I have a copy, I always check. If it says CTH on the label, then I'm going to go ahead and look at the dead wax, and I would suggest you do the same. All right, number 8, we have Van the Man, Moondance, his 3rd solo album. It's from 1970. It's on Warner Brothers Records. And the version that most people have is the Warner Brother Arrowhead. It's the green label. And the WB is in the shape of an arrowhead. So that's why they call it the Arrowhead label. I think it's one of my favorite from the early 70s Warner Brothers. So that's what your typical original pressing is going to look like from Van Morrison. But if you happen upon the very first pressing, then a lot of times it'll be, if it's on the Pittman, if it's a Pittman pressing, then it's not going to have the Arrowhead label on it, but it's going to have my favorite, and that's the W7. And the fun part about the W7 in a very first pressing, so you can get some Arrowheads that have that as well, but on side 1, track 5, you have Into the Mystic. Well, the very first pressings had a have tambourine in them. And that is Van's preferred mix. On subsequent pressings, they got rid of the tambourine, much to his chagrin. I've heard he's can be a pretty cantankerous guy, so I'm sure he raised hell when that happened. Um, but yeah, if you get the very first pressing, you get the tambourine and you get the W7 label, which is they were phasing that out. I think the Pittman plant was the only one that still had those, and that's why it ended up with that. But fantastic album. If you want to seek out a first press with the tambourine on Into the Mystic, I would suggest you do so. Keep your eye out. All right, now we have another one that's extremely common. One of my favorite albums from James Gang. Love that Joe Walsh. Here he is on the back on their motorcycles. So the very first pressings will have on the bomber suite, it'll say B Bolero. So if you have the B Bolero on the back, then you have a very, very first pressing. If it says B Cast Your Fate and there's no Bolero in there, then you don't have Bolero. And it's really a great part of the bomber suite. And what happened was it'll also say Bolero on the label as well. But what had happened was the estate of Ravel, who was the one who composed Bolero, he had long since passed, right? He died in 1937, but his estate caught wind of this and they were not happy at all because they didn't have any skin in the game. They didn't really get any writing credits. So they kind of wrote a cease and desist. They said that they were going to sue James Gang, and not only sue James Gang, but also sue their label, ABC. So neither parties wanted anything to do with that. So that's why the subsequent presses have the Bolero taken off because of the potential lawsuit. So if you find an original, it's going to be worth more. The one I have is the one I would suggest if you can find a Monarch one that has the stamp MR in it and is also original to Bolero. That's what I found is the best sounding one, in my opinion, and definitely one to keep your eye out for. That one also can be had. I've found several Bolero copies over the years. So another one of my favorites, the Seeds with Pushing Too Hard. So this is the Seeds' first album from 1966, and this is a very first pressing. And the thing that you want to look out to find a very first pressing, if you can, and they're much more valuable, is the reflection down below here where it says the Seeds, when it's reflected from the green, will be in black like this. So the subsequent pressings had a green reflection, and they also, some of them also had a hype over here for Pushing Too Hard. So if it has either the hype or green, you don't have a first pressing. Or if it doesn't have the hype, but it has the green, then you have what would be like a second pressing or a second iteration. And the other thing that is different about the first pressings on the GMP Crescendo label is that the GMP Crescendo is going to be boxed like that. If it's not boxed, then it's not a true first pressing mono or true first pressing stereo. And these ones are trickier to find. The Seeds can be had, but the first pressings go for big bucks as opposed to the later iterations of it. So, but fantastic album, garage rock at its finest. All right, now another really common one, but a favorite of mine, the Beach Boys, All Summer Long. So this one's really common as well, right? And I really like this album. I've got a mono and stereo copy of it, and they do come up, but the hard part about these is they're usually always beat. But if you want a very first original pressing of these, then here's what you need to look for. I'll show you. So right here, there'll be an error. This song is supposed to be called Don't Back Down. it'll say don't break down. And then also the lettering is different here. So this, all the type here was black in later pressings. And so this was a mistake. They have the Beach Boys matches the hits, right? I Get Around, Little Honda, and Wendy. Then All Summer Long matches the rest of the songs here. The way they meant to do it was to have All Summer Long, the orange here match the I Get Around, Little Honda, and Wendy, and then all the rest of the tracks to be in black. So if you find and on the back, it has it right. It has Don't Back Down. But if you find this version here, that's the very first version. And I wouldn't say it's considerably more valuable than the corrected one, but it's definitely fun to have. Here's my stereo copy too. And it's the version I prefer. I kind of get a little nerdy about that. I always want the very, very, very first, whether it was an error or not. So, all right, the number 11, or no, that was 11, 12. We have a really famous album that most people know. First Led Zeppelin album from 1969. Absolutely fantastic album. And let's see what copy we have here. This is a Columbia Terre-Haute pressing, right? On the Atlantic. It's US pressing. Atlantic green red label. That's the version that most people are going to see. And this one's actually crept up in value quite a bit. Just the original pressings have. I feel like you used to be able to get those for $10 all day long, and now they kind of clock in around 25 to 30, it seems like. But that's not the version I want to show you. The version I want to show you is the Indianapolis pressing. So cover looks the same. That's all good and well. But the label is different. And this one's very sought after. This one has the Atco colors on it, right? It's got the Atlantic label, but it's got the Atco colors on it. And this is only the Indianapolis pressing has this. And some people say that this was a record club version. There's really no identifiers to state that. And there's a couple other things that tell me that it really wasn't. And that's because side one has different song mixes. I highly doubt that a record club pressing would be messing with the mixes, right? And then side two has longer pauses between tracks, which isn't really significant. But having different presses of side one is. And this is a highly collectible, highly sought after album. If you could probably get a beat up copy for around $100, but more than likely you're probably going to pay 200 or more for one that's in really nice condition. But again, that's why whenever you see Led Zeppelin, just pull it out, look at the vinyl. Sometimes people miss that. Most people don't with something that's that glaringly obvious, but it's definitely worth checking out. So a next one is also, the next one, 13, is my favorite from this artist. Black Sabbath, Master of Reality. So this is their third full-length album and my favorite from the original Black Sabbath lineup. And this album originally had 4 tracks on each side. But something funny happened with the very, very first pressing. And this is, again, it's Terre-Haute. Seems to be a pattern. Terre-Haute seems to be the pressing plant that has that. But if you get a first Terre-Haute, it will say Masters. So if you see Masters up there instead of Master of Reality, then you have a very first pressing. And there's a couple of other errors on here as well. They have additional tracks. So number 2 is After Forever. That is a song, but in parentheses, it says including the elegy, which isn't anywhere else. And then They also have added track A5, The Haunting. It says The Haunting, 45 seconds. It's not a track, it's not on there. Then you flip to side 2. You have track B2, Step Up. Again, not a song that's on there. And then you go down to track B5, Death Mask. Again, a song that's not on there. So the story goes that Black Sabbath was sending the track lists and sending edits to Warner Brothers, and that they were doing this to mess with them because they kind of had a little bit of clout. They had some money in their pocket. And so the very first one has these errors. The second one um, still has the including elegy on it. So I'll still have that error. And then the third pressing of it, the third iteration, still on the green label, has everything corrected. So it took 3 shots to get it all. But it's a fun one too. And if you get a clean original, it's probably going to be at least double the value of what a regular pressing would be. So number 14, we're going to go to another artist that is near and dear to me and to many people, and that's the Beatles. And this is their White Album. And really common, tons and tons of presses of this. But if you can find an original Scranton pressing or an original Los Angeles pressing, it may have errors on the label. And if you have all 7 errors, then again, instead of a $20 album, I'll say it's maybe clocking in at that, you're probably, if it's in good condition, you're looking at closer to $100 probably if it's in really nice condition. So we'll start with side 1. What you're going to look for here is you're going to look for Obla-di, Obla-da all together. If you can see that, it doesn't have any of the hyphens between. And then number 6, Bungalow Bill. It's just Bungalow Bill instead of the continuing adventure of Bungalow Bill. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is the really common one. It's track 5. It's Rocky Raccoon, missing a C in there. That was on a lot of subsequent presses too, so that's not an uncommon error. Number 4 is Why Don't We Do It in the Road? It's missing the question mark after road. So that's the first 4. And then on side 3, we have, actually we don't have any errors on side 3. All the rest are on side 4. So on side 4, you have Revolution number 1. It's just, so there's an NO for number. It's not supposed to be an NO there. It's just supposed to be 1, Revolution 1. And then you have track 5, Revolution number 9. Number 9 has the NO again. It should just be Revolution 9. And then the last one is on 6 there. It says good night as in one word. It's supposed to be good, and then night. There's supposed to be space between the two. So if you find all 7 of those errors and it's clean, again, it's the very, very first pressing that you can get. And it's also quite a bit more valuable than just the run of the mill. All right, now we go to another one of my favorite artists, David Bowie, with his 3rd full-length album from 1970. This is when RCA repressed it with him with a high kick, and then it's got the poster in there as well, which is a copy I think that a lot of people have. But the one to look up for, besides the original UK pressing, which never comes around, is the original US pressing on Mercury with a completely different cover. I don't think David Bowie was a big fan of this cover, and that's why it didn't really last all that long. But there are tons and tons of bootlegs of this. So there's a couple things you want to look for when you're trying to identify if you've got an original one. So the original one is a Phillips pressing, and your matrices on each side, they're going to be stamped. They're not going to be etched. If they're etched, it's a bootleg, and it's, in my mind, it's worthless. So I wouldn't spend a lot of money on that. If you can get it for cheap and you want it, go for it. The Mercury label is also going to be a little bit messed up as well. And then on the back of the album cover, you have to look at to make sure your cover is authentic as well, but it usually will be if the vinyl is. Right back here where it says "Oh by Jingo," it has the track or the all the lyrics to the Superman. That needs to be really close, about a text width between the two, and that's how you know you've got the original cover. The bootlegs will have this drop down further. So, and these are definitely going up in value. I think there's not that many of them around still. So these are, looks like they're averaging around $100 just for the non-promo copy. So definitely keep an eye out for that. All right, now we're gonna move to my favorite album from one of my favorite bands, the Stooges. And this one's harder to find, so I get it. So most people are just happy if they can find one, period, more or less what version it is, right? So this is the version that most people have if they've got an original. The red Elektra label, Stooges on the label there. This is a Columbia tearhout. But the very, very first pressings have a couple of differences. So the first difference is it won't say Stooges on the label. That's how you know you have the first pressing of the Stooges. And I'll show you what I've got here. This one not only has the Stooges, it omits the Stooges on there like the original first pressing, but this one also has the tracks in the wrong order. So it has number 1 as 1969, which it is, and then it has number 2, Not Right, which it's not. It's supposed to be I Want to Be Your Dog. And then number 3 is We Will Fall. It plays in the right order, but the label's wrong. This is the Columbia Pittman version. And then on the back, same thing here. And then on 5, you have I Want to Be Your Dog, and that's not what it's supposed to be, right? But again, all these play in the right order. This one is tricky to find. I did find a copy, but if you look on Discogs, I think one sold a while back for somewhere in the neighborhood of $800. So these ones don't show up all that often. But what you may find is you may find an original without the Stooges on the label, and that's the one. If you do, snap it up. If it's a gold label, it's not an original. It's Canadian, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. Well, there's maybe a gold label. There's not. If you see a gold label, it's Canadian. It's not a U.S. pressing. So, okay, we're almost there, gang. Number 17, we've got Bob Dylan, Highway 61 Revisited. Another great album, and another pretty common album. But if you get an original pressing, that has, this one has 1B on it. So if it has 1A, 1B, 1C, or 1D on side 1, then song 4 from a Buick 6 is going to have a harmonica intro from Bob Dylan. It's really cool, that you won't get on subsequent presses. And It's only on the stereo, not on the mono, so don't look on the monos. But again, this album, I don't know, 20 bucks, 25, 30 maybe for a nice copy. If you find this version, it's more like $100. So when you see Highway 61 Revisited, stereo pressing, an original one, pull it out, take a look at it, see if it's got the right matrix on side one, and then you've hit pay dirt. All right, the last one is another one of my favorite albums from all time, an extremely common one. And it's Neil Young, After the Harvest. This is his third full-length album, came out in 1970, and it's all killer, no filler. I say that On the Beach is my favorite, and I think it is, but this one here is, I think anybody could love this album. And there's what your original Reprise label looks like. But there is, again, I believe, Tear Hout again. It seems to be the common theme here. There is a Tear Hout pressing that is quite a bit more valuable that you want to keep your eye out for as you're going through. And that Tear Hout pressing is going to have a different label. It's going to have the two-tone label on it. Again, you'll know this right away when you see it. It's an easy spot. But if somebody doesn't catch that, everything's the same on it besides the label. But if somebody doesn't catch that, it's a very valuable record. Again, somewhere in the neighborhood of $100. Goes from a $10 album to a $100 album if you are paying attention. And most record sellers and stores are paying attention, but when you're out there digging in the wild, sometimes you'll come across something like that. There's also a 76 pressing that has red lettering here instead of the gold. And that's actually a pretty valuable pressing as well because it's a variant. But I think we've definitely gone on long enough here. And hopefully you found this enjoyable. And when you are out there in the wild and you're digging, and even when you're at your record store, sometimes they'll miss that. Look through those common copies, whether you have one or you don't. Look through them because sometimes you can find treasures, and I hope you do. So, all right, till next time, we'll see you later. Thanks.